Hello, this is Maureen. I am showing you what I have here are two Santos dolls that I made. Now these are about, at least 24 inches tall. And they are more of a statue than a play kind of doll. I gave them instruments so they'd have something interesting to hold that wasn't necessarily of religious value. They were used basically by the Catholic Church to convert those folks from their other religion to Catholicism. So I guess some of this would be considered the might of the Catholic Church, at least in the time frame. So these would have been post 1492, after the New World was established. And you saw a lot of these come into play. Santos meaning saint. Represented saints, the Holy Family, and other kind of religious figures of the time in order to tell stories and to possibly convert those folks. I'm more looking at the religious aspect because a lot of these kinds of figurines and dolls were dressed in clothing that was either scaled down and initially made for the figurine, or they were a dress-like figure that was donated by a wealthy benefactor and then scaled down to fit the doll, or pinned in such a way that it would fit the doll. So what I have here is I have one holding sort of a violin-like instrument in miniature form. The clothing itself I completely made by hand from scratch. Underneath these, the dolls really don't have legs. They have a cage-like item that allows them to sit very sturdily on a table. There are varieties of these figurines that have full arms and legs, and they can independently stand, but most of the time they'll have some sort of stand to use to allow them to stand upright without tipping over. Because something like this, as fancy as it is, and especially if the faces were sculpted, you didn't want them tipping over and injuring the hands or face, or breaking any of the other things they might be holding. So them being sturdy was important. Also, sturdy is important when making the sea voyage from Spain here. You see a lot of these kinds of figurines that are from the Victorian era, but they go back much further, up to about 1700. Or, well, some of the earliest ones are in the 1700s, but they can even go back further. I think there's only a couple of them that are near original. Both of them are dressed in, I used silk on the outside, but it's a woven silk on the outer dresses, so the orange and the goldish yellow color. And then I used like a silk satin on the insides and for any sleeve linings and whatnot. They do also have, zoom in here, we have sort of a lace ruff on this one with lace cuffs and edging on the undersleeves. And then this one I used a linen that had these wonderful little tassels, so I kept those on and added some very nice silk along the edge of the dress. And then we have a veil. Now you might be seeing some little dots of dust. These are currently in my bedroom, so this is one of those things where unfortunately they don't really get dusted, and I don't have one of those wonderful doll stands big enough to cover these guys to keep them from dust. So they live upstairs. I wouldn't dare put them in the basement. But I made a very elaborate wrapped braid in the Spanish-like style. She's more of an Italian Spanish version, because I'm basing her off of the figurine in the Vienna Museum that actually would strum a lute. So I used that as a basis because it's a clockwork figurine However, I'm not able to replicate the clockwork at this point in time, so I still loved the way the outfit was and the colors used, so I was able to replicate it here in a Santos doll instead. So, and this is bobbin lace all the way down around the bottom and on the sleeves. So, and I kept the tassels here on the edge because these were meant to be items that were to awe and inspire. So all the frills were definitely something we had to look at. Was able to use some freshwater pearls as well. I was able to make a little kind of guitar strap, so to speak, for this one to allow the doll to be able to hold the instrument steadily. And the hands were actually amazingly useful with the way they originally positioned them to hold items. So you'll see a lot of them will have, if you look up Santos dolls on eBay or on Google, you'll see a lot of very expressive, very Marian-like features as far as the females, the very dewy, sort of staring off into the distance expression, and then these wonderfully shaped hands to hold things. So this one was another wonderful woven piece, and it even had sort of these ends that were perfect to make a sleeve. I have blue under sleeves as well with lace, and then she's holding her instrument. Kind of like Saint Cecilia. I call them Cecilia and Barbara, but Saint Barbara normally holds a castle, but nonetheless, we have our minstrel Santos dolls. So a conversion tool, but also a fashion tool, because these would have conveyed the fashion that was popular in Europe and would have brought its impressive way it looks to the New World. Wasn't really specifically used as a fashion piece, but the way that art always went, especially religious art back then, you would see the saints dressed up in what was considered modern fashion at the time. So we use a lot of those images in the SCA as a means to figure out fashion at the different points in time when the artist had depicted them. Well, instead of it being a painting this time around, the Santos dolls could be used as a means to actually have fabric dressed on a figurine. And I actually was able to read in a research paper about the French dolls that appeared that were specifically for fashion. They moved from the fashion doll small versions to a more larger figurine, larger than even these. These are at least 24, 26 inches. The mannequins were at least half size, so you're talking about 3 foot tall or so. Figurine that would be dressed in miniature clothing, something that you could take to a tailor, have reproduced, and then you'd return the doll after the tailor was done with its use, and then return it back to the original owner so they could, lend it out to somebody else. They used to actually, you'd sort of rent it. You would pay a little bit of money to have that doll, French fashion doll, in the, I think it was the late early 1700s in America, to convey European fashion. So I found these really fascinating little offshoots about dolls and fashion and how things traveled, even beyond the fashion dolls that I found within period that were used in the Elizabethan court to convey fashion of what was popular at the time. It continued on, but it also evolved. So that's a little bit of what I found out about what they call Santos dolls. There's a couple other names and versions depending on the language, because there's also a French version for it as well. But they were basically figurines dressed up in Renaissance fashion, brought to the New World, and then kept in either someone's private chapel or in a church to show might and majesty of the saints. So I really hope that you found this a bit fascinating. I certainly did, doing all the homework and the research, and then of course making the dolls was always fun. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And I will be getting back with another video as soon as I can. Bye!